Good. Holy shit, we're live. Weird World War II is live and on the march. What's up, fellas and folks and ladies and everybody in between? If you guys can hear me, let me know that you guys can hear me and see me. Ooh, look at that ugly mug. Ooh. Fat Jesus over here. J-Boy. What's going on, man? I'm glad you made it. Oh, it's going to write you today. I was going to see if you can 3D print up something for me, dude. I'll shoot you an STL. I know, look at my flowing locks. It's going to be I need to get 2 of them. And I'll pay you if you missile looking things. I'll shoot you the file and see what you think. Should be cool. I'm gonna use those for like some sort of like mission objective. Like you gotta take out the SAM site. That would be pretty sweet. So what's been up, dude? We're gonna jump on here and we'll start proper in about 2 minutes, folks. 8 o'clock hits the mark. Yeah, I got a new job, starting a new job on Friday. Excited about that. More money. Always good to have some more money in the pocket. So, should be good. Should be fun. Oh, yeah, dude. It's fucking YouTube, man. So, like, of course, they got upset because I had a bunch of miniatures with naked ladies and shit and tied up, upside down, spread eagle and shit. What the fuck? That's like... What's wrong with that? So I censored it, or they censored me, and I just said, fuck it. You guys can listen to it. I've showed it all before. It's all that manufacturer stuff, which is fucking awesome, which is a sponsor as well. So you guys check it out. The sponsors are below. Go swing over there. Check out all that awesome shit. All of our awesome sponsors. I don't know. Hell, they don't tell you. It's an algorithm, dude. It's like, dude, YouTube has refined the Big Brother, like, to the fucking whatever. So, all right, guys, 8 o'clock. Time to ring the bell. Boing, 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 boing. World War II's on the march. Yeah, no shit. It's funny because like I purposely like looked into like what do you call it? Open content. What do they call it? I fucking went brain dead. That doesn't have any copyrights. What's that called, baby? With shit that's not copywritten? Free content, whatever the fuck it is. Like movies. And I posted a couple movies that are free of that, right? Public domain. And they came back with like, oh, you can't do this. I'm like, bullshit, dude. Fucking public domain. It says it, no one fucking owns this shit. So just because, listen, guys, as a suggestion, just because someone bitches doesn't mean, okay, here's an example. If someone sends you a fucking bill in the mail, are you going to pay it just because they sent it to you? Fuck no. Or you shouldn't, at least. Shit. I'm not paying that. Or like, whatever. So someone just claimed, I guess somebody claimed it, but I know for a fact, I did a bunch of research on it, that it's a public domain thing. So whatever. But anywho's, guys. Okay, so jumping into the weird World War II tonight, we're going to talk about civilians. Okay, using civilians and fighting with, against, or around civilians in your wargame. Now, it's my personal experience that civilians are a sticky subject, okay? A lot of people, you see, honestly, guys, a lot of gamers just game. They say that they want to do the historical aspects and all this shit, but they never take into account the civilian populations that are stuck in between the fighting, right, of these belligerents. Now, some guys will say, "Oh, it's too that's too much. That's beyond the pale. I can't have that on my fucking battlefield because it's scary or whatever the fuck it might be." I'm like, but listen, you guys are more than welcome to have armies just massacre each other on the battlefield, and when something really realistic pops up, everybody drops their monocle, pisses their pants. So now, and I'm not saying that to dig on people who don't do it. Now, I mean, and you can take civilians to whatever level you want to do. Like, so there's several ways civilians can be used in your game. Okay. But whatever they are, they're definitely a factor. Okay. That's going to interrupt. But whatever they are, they're definitely a factor. Okay. That's going to interrupt normal gameplay. Okay. If you're used to playing like a bolt action point versus point, I got to secure this widget in the middle, 6 inches from the left-hand corner next to the, whatever the fuck. If that's how you play, then civilians are going to be in your way. They're going to like trip you up. It's something you're not going to do because it's, not convenient. You just want to fight each other, kill each other, and, secure the widget. Adam, good to see you, man. Adam from Wargaming China's here. Jason from Road Agent Leathers here. And Matt, what's up, buddy? Yes. So we'll talk about the different ways of using civilians. Okay. Now, the most common civilian use that you're going to see on the battlefields and the gaming are partisans, resistance, stuff like that. Okay. Now, what happens is they revert into like, ad hoc squads, infantry squads, right? And again, that's it. The civilians on the table are a military unit, and that's how they act. There's no other, civilians around except those fighting as a unit, okay? Which, I mean, is stupid in my opinion. I mean, if you're fighting in Stalingrad, there's going to be people around, man. If you're fighting in anywhere, where there's people living, you're going to have people there. I mean, not everybody's able to escape. Not everybody's able to, become a refugee. And even then, man, you might have groups of refugees crossing the battlefield right before it happens or whatever, and they get stuck in the middle. Sean, what's up, buddy? Yeah, man. But civilians are easy to paint. There's no fucking uniforms. You can just paint them however you want. The civilian clothes are easy to do. But so partisans and stuff like that make a great component, in a game. But again, in a lot of these tournament style play, they just become another unit. They don't become anything special. They might have like an infiltration rule because they're in the terrain before, they're in the city before anybody else gets there, that kind of shit. Right. But it really dumbs down their use. Now, civilians, obviously, if you're using them as partisans, right, more than likely they're going to be of regular, quality or lower. You're not now. Not to say that there aren't civilians out there that have military experience, that have from past wars or whatever it might be. They're military inclined. They've had the training, but they're just not active or they're older. But that age and the inactivity or whatever can reduce their abilities, so it kind of stymies them into that kind of clumped, like average or worse category. Now, partisans in resistance can be better. I'd say they can even be veteran. I don't know about elite, but in certain situations they could be. In certain like scenario-based games and whatnot, they could be elite. But in general, in just fighting, probably not. And one of the big drags for civilians is the weaponry. They may not have access to like military grade heavy weapons, like heavy machine guns or grenade launchers, or they'll have small arms for sure, but explosives, they'll have grenades, but they probably wouldn't have demo charges. But then you have homemade stuff, so you can have rules to where homemade stuff is lethal, but if kind of like you can do it like the old 40K orc stuff. It's devastating if it fucking works, if it doesn't blow up in your face. you could do that. But so you've got the partisan slash, resistance. And then you can do like, militia. Militia would probably be on the low spectrum of quality. And, conscripts would be even lower. So, that's one thing about civilians. They can be anything. And you'd have to have whoever's organizing it think through. Okay. Now, another thing about civilians is that they're speed bumps in the conflict, in the game. Okay. Now, these can be people that end up, like they're in a home, like on the battlefield, there's a family in there, or there's refugees hiding in there when the fighting starts. Then the enemies, they close in, and then depending on if it's a friendly population or a hostile population, it could vary what happens, right? And it depends on the soldier too. If you're playing like Imperial Japanese and you're in fucking China, they're not going to give a fuck about the Chinese. They will just fucking, and again, this has nothing to do with the people that are alive in China right now. This has to do, or in Japan, this has to do with the military doctrine of the day and just how they were taught to treat the population of China. Okay. Now they wouldn't care. They would shoot artillery into buildings. They know they have civilians in it or whatever. So certain belligerents against certain populations would act differently. So let's say Germans, okay? And this is just a generalization. Germans like fighting in Soviet Union, okay? More than likely wouldn't give a shit if there's civilians in a structure that's, housing maybe, whatever in the structure. They probably wouldn't care. They probably shell it anyway or whatever. But if you reverse that, if you had Germans fighting on Germany and they know that there's some civilians in this area, they may balk at, fighting or shooting certain weaponry in that area, or even shooting in that area because, it's their population. Now, again, certain types of soldiers, like, fanatical political troops, and then you can get into cultists, shit like that. They won't care. It's the dogma, or it's the political ideal, or it's whatever that makes them fanatical, or it's the political ideal, or it's whatever that makes them fanatical. It overrides everything else, overrides their humanity. So they'll level it or do whatever the fuck they want. Yeah. So, and Adam's saying civilians do represent more problems on the tabletop. Unarmed civvies have never been on the table, to be honest. I do feel in an Imperial Japanese Navy Reserve Regiment, all in civvies, but armed and supporting a white, whatever. Okay, so, and that's true. But this is when we play with civilians, it's usually like a third party, and we have rules. Okay, so like if they're close to a friendly unit, those civilians, if we'll roll a morale check on them, whatever their morale or whatever your leadership or whatever you call it. If they fail, they'll stay in place and freak out because they're just freaking out. They're just going to stay in place. But if they pass, they have an option to, more than likely, they're going to try to run. They're going to run to the friendlies, right? Well, think about this, guys. You're advancing into a town. Okay, let's say you're I don't fucking know. You're Brits in France, okay, and you're entering a small village, and then all of a sudden a bunch of French civilians are running at you for safety and security, right? What are you going to do? You're going to ignore them? Well, you can't, because they're going to come to you. So because of that fact, you have to act. And in a gaming environment, that means that unit that they're running to is held up. Okay. They have to react to whatever's happening. They have to, gun them down. They have to secure them. They have to, shelter them or whatever it might be. But that action, the civilian factor, has blunted probably your intended, action with that unit, because they got to deal with them. Now, pre-game, and again, we like to play scenario based, and we play with role playing stuff sometimes in our games. So we like to try to keep it real because it makes things fucking harder. Okay, so if you and another, so that same example, these French are running at you, right? And they're your allies. So what do? You secure the French, like a couple of your guys, escort them, try to escort them off the board, okay? Or but you're gonna have to deal with it because they're civilians and they're coming to you and they're gonna interact with you. Now, or you can be a bastard, okay, and gun them down. But again, that unit is balked by having to deal with them. Now, if let's say the worst case scenario, it's an unfriendly unit or whatever it might be against these civilians and they gun them down. Now, what we also do is friendly units that see that this enemy unit has gunned down unarmed civilians, surrendering or whatever. What you would roll is another leadership or morale check. If they pass, they can control their emotions, right? Okay. And act like normal. If they fail, there's a fact there. It depends on how bad you fail. If you fail really bad, okay, really, really bad, you roll. Okay. It's either they freak out and they're like, holy shit, and they kind of your normal break, right? They break like normal. Or they fucking become frenzied. They're horrified at what they just saw, and their bile is up, and they're ready to kick ass even more. So it drives them to fight harder, especially against the unit that caused this horrible, action. Now, and again, a lot of people don't want to get that heavy, They don't. It's not a problem shooting armed guys at each other, and that's fine, killing each other like that. But when an unarmed factor in there, there's that, do I want to play like that? And then there's a moral stance. Do you play your own morals, or do you play morality of the unit that you're in, or the conflict that you're in, or the political and the historical aspects of it all? It's up to you. Again, civilians can get sticky and they can get uncomfortable for those people who take fucking everything serious. Okay, this is a game. This is not a fucking. What we do doesn't reflect our personality. If you're a bastard and you want to shoot the civilians that are in your way, doesn't mean you're a fucking murderer. So just those kind of fucking people that think like that, you don't need to be around, because they can't distinguish a game from reality. But anyway. But also, so civilians being encountered surprisingly, same situation. You got let's say you have the Germans entering this town, and they come into a building, right? And then they'll say there's 5 or 6 civilians in there. Okay. Well, as that infantry unit, what are you going to do? Okay. What are you going to do with them? You don't necessarily can trust them because they're French and you're German. Okay. You can't quite trust them, right? You don't know if they're going to turn on you, if you don't know what's going to happen, right? So more than likely you're not going to gun them down, because it just wastes, it wastes your actions or whatever. But what you'll do is you'll have people secure them or throw them out or whatever. But what that still does, it reduces your squad efficiency in that action or that turn or whatever, because you have to deal with the situation. You got to deal with it. You can't just let them sit there, or you do just sit there. Now, we have a chart that's, they roll on. Are they armed? Are they motivated against you? Are they just frightened? Are they just going to put their heads down and just wish for the best? You don't know. And all of them may not act the same way. Some might be, completely, neutered by the whole conflict, but there might be one person that has a grenade on them. You know what I mean? And it could do a lot of damage if they're not being watched or secured. But and then so there's those kind of surprises, right? And then civilians can also trigger game mechanics, right? So you can have a unit on opportunity fire, right? Well, all of a sudden, let's say you're aiming the same situation. You got Germans, or let's say the Brits are, they got a Bren team and they're looking down an alley or whatever, and all of a sudden, a bunch of civilians run by, right? Does that trigger their fire? I mean, we usually do a roll because, of course, they're not expecting civilians; they're expecting the Germans because they know they're there. They're just waiting for them. Do you roll? I mean, do you make that morale check? If you pass that morale check, they're able to hold their fire. If they don't, they open up, and then they're like, "Oh fuck!" And if they actually do kill some guys, some civilians, it's instant morale or leadership test with maybe some sort of modifier, like a horrific modifier or something like that they just shot into a bunch of civilians. Now, I mean, of course, they're trained in reality. Soldiers are trained to, this is going to happen. It happens. But on the battlefield, if you're playing skirmish on the battlefield, if you're playing skirmish level or, platoon level, you can actually illustrate the horror of men with morals that what happens if they do gun down a bunch of civilians on accident, right? And it could be a modifier for them for the remainder of the game, like their morale or leadership is reduced, or there's penalties on them because they're shaken by it all or whatever. And then it could be like, if other civilians see it, they would be forced not to go toward that belligerent. Maybe they stay in place or they go to the German or whatever it might be. So in essence, civilians will slow down an advance in combat, and it'll reduce your squad and your army's efficiency because they have to deal with them. Now, if you get into like skirmish level, heavy or even heavy role playing aspect of civilians, that is where civilians shine. Okay, because if it's not a battlefield situation, let's say it's a patrol. Okay. Let's say, same situation. You got a German patrol patrolling through a small French town, right? There's no fighting going on. It's just a patrol. Well, you got civilians meandering around, right? How do you respond to these civilians? I mean, do you just start gunning everybody down? Do you send people to secure or, whatever? But you got to watch them, right? You got to watch every civilian, because you don't know who's going to, respond or, if someone's going to do something. And if something does get triggered, what do? Do you engage what's, from where the fire came from, or do you just start shooting everywhere? I mean, it leads to heavy confusion. And you can put that in your games, man. You can put one unit had a partisan unit. Let's say there's partisans on the field, right? And they report that we have partisan activity and we're fighting the partisans or whatever, and then an unarmed civilian group, you don't know they're unarmed, right? Do you shoot at them? We have things called sighting checks, so we can actually do checks to see if they're armed, right? And if they are, you can engage them. If they're not, you can not. Or even, do you trust that? But civilians really add a whole nother level of gaming. Now, I would suggest if you do play with civilians, have a third party play them, like a battle commander or a battle master or game master, whatever you want to call them, and they can run the third party. They can run them, however they want, or they can follow a script that they've created in situations that happen. You can come up with modifiers and come up with, if something happens, if you accidentally hurt people and you give a shit, and there's be those modifiers. If you shoot civilians, you don't give a shit. And then the enemy sees you do it, what happens. But civilians can really be an interesting level of gameplay. Now, if you're playing, and especially if you're playing in a campaign setting, right? Your interaction with civilians in occupied area or even liberated areas can be a factor. I mean, if you're entering into an area that's friendly, right? That's a boon, in your campaign. So, you're getting, local information and reconnaissance from the civilians because you're friendly with them. But if you enter this village with accidental killings, or you're just leveling you're leveling the buildings. You don't give a shit if there's civilians in there or not. You're just shooting them up anyway. Just there could be Germans in it, so you just start howitzering the buildings. Then that would definitely like degrade the willingness of the civilian population to support you, because you're just you're trigger happy and you're just blowing the shit out of everything. So and then within the civilians, again, there's variables, because you're not talking about a uniform trained group. They're all like different. They're all individuals. So if you're having a third party playing the civilians, they can put in like individual partisans or individual saboteurs, or whatever it might be, and then you letting civilians pass, or securing them in an area and then moving away. And it's at that moment that one individual can throw a Molotov inside at your tank or whatever it might be. So it's pretty interesting. That's true. I mean, that scene is horrific, dude. I mean, he's just lighting up everybody, right? And I mean, war is fucking hell, dude. And I don't wish it on anybody. And you can just see in the conflicts that we have today. You have the Russians just bombing fucking city blocks and shit. What the fuck for? Anyway, it's just, civilians are a factor in warfare. And if you want to play, and I put it to all you hardcore historical guys, I'll put it to you. Play historical. You're going to have to deal with those populations, man. And if you don't deal with them and just fight it out like normal, I would put it to you that the population is going to be hostile, or you're going to have repercussions of your lack of, civility against your allies, right? Or even against the enemy. If you know that there's a church full of fucking kids, right, and you just level it anyway, even if and you occupy the area, there's always going to be some sort of retribution for that act. So you're going to automatically make, civilian, saboteurs and partisans because of that action. So you really got to think it through. And it becomes a level of almost like a psyop, and depending on how you do it. But the thing is that gaming guys, a lot of the games of the day are fucking tournament based, fucking just clinical, surgical. You just fight. You have this many points and this many points, and you fight. This unit has special rules because, this unit has rifle grenades, but nobody else does in the fucking world. It's like, what the fuck? Every goddamn belligerent had a fucking rifle grenadier. They all had rifle grenades, all that shit. Almost everybody had the same kind of shit that everybody else did. And these special rules, I get why they do it, because it's a tournament thing. You're not playing historical. You're just playing, if make-believe World War II or whatever it might be. That's why I play weird World War II, guys. We're almost we can be, okay, so in the world that I play in, that I like to set myself in, is the old grindhouse movies of the 70s, fucking horrible shit. And like the men's magazines of the 50s and 60s, with like tough GIs, defending the women from the evil Nazi tank regime or what, that kind of shit. This comical, kind of cartoony, way over the top characteristic of everybody, But that's weird World War II. You can go crazy. You can do these crazy fucking things that's what makes it enjoyable. But when you have these guys that are like, I'm diehard World War II, and this is how it is. Well, there's a lot that isn't, that they don't even take into account. And I put it to all those guys is that civilians. There should be civilians always in your games, unless it's like on the open steppe during Kursk or some shit. And even then, you might run into some farmer or some shit. But again, a lot of people don't want to don't want to play at that level. They want to play just this, insular, we're just killing each other. No one else can get hurt. There's no mistakes or whatever. And again, I would even put it toward if you're playing a third party person playing your civilians. And let's say you do, like, you've got a howitzer and you're just laying into this building, this church tower, right? Because you assume that if you play blind, we play a lot of blind, like in our games, unless you actually sight them, that you can't. Oh, you can still shoot at them, but you just don't know if anything's there. But let's say you level a fucking church tower, thinking that the enemy's using it as a outpost. And then you find out you just murdered a bunch of fucking people that were hiding in there for security. Man, that's gotta mess up your troops, at least a little. And if you do, and especially in campaigns, you definitely need to reduce or put either boon or bane on your civilian populations and all that kind of stuff. Because I think that's a level of gaming that it's enjoyable in that it makes you fucking it prevents you from doing what you fucking want to do, right? Because it's rare in combat that you can do your plan goes exactly how you plan it. Sometimes you can't do what you want to do. All of a sudden you get standing orders that said no engaging in civilian structures. Okay, you can't shoot up the civilian structure unless they're taking fire from it or something like that. You can't shell the city. That's why you have to do an infantry assault and secure it through the infantry. You can't just level it with artillery fire. So that will reduce. Your high command can be giving you orders. And again, this is fucking like moral command, right? So like if you're playing like the fascists, unlike let's because we're playing in China right now, the Japanese will fucking shell anything. They don't give a fuck. They just level the whole city if they have to. It doesn't matter. That's what they do. So, but if you're a Chinese, defender, I mean, and that the city's full of civilians, I mean, do you shell? Do you have access to that kind of weaponry in that game? Because have the high command deemed that it's not worth the civilian casualties to use this kind of weaponry, but the enemy will. So you have that moral limitation to keep you from using those weapons. So it lessens your effectiveness in your force. So you may not be able to bring the exact kind of troops and weapons that you want to the game because you have this higher command saying no flame weapons. So you're like, shit, can't take any flamethrowers. So I got to substitute that with something else. Yeah. So, Matt was saying, I'm sure, a lot of invaders are trained that way. They're thought to believe that the people that they're attacking or invading aren't human. And that's throughout history. The fascist mindset that, these are under humans or lower humans and aren't worth blah, 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 whatever the fuck, whatever. And it does. Anyway, we won't get too heavy in the reality and morality and all that shit because it is. I mean, it's using people, shit, dude. And then even during the World War II conflict, you have so many persecuted peoples. You got the Jews, the Gypsies, the gays, the Bolsheviks. You got the commies, the capitalists. I mean, it just depends on where you're at. There's all the vilified people, and then you can actually use those kind of situations that those people will rise up. You can actually play games where the civilians are like, fuck this, it's done, we're uprising. Because we have, there's historical events of uprisings, all through occupied areas. And sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're not. But that would also, if you're playing a campaign game, that would be another aspect that you could use if you're friendly to the dominated population, and then let's say the enemy, being the friends of these people, aren't able to communicate with them. That you've squashed their their resistance movement and all that stuff. So they would probably, the civilians might be neutral. So you may have a safer supply chain in the rear because you don't have a bunch of partisans in there. You don't have a bunch of people pissed, so it just depends. So you can do a lot with civilians, and what's happening on the battlefield and how you act will have repercussions. Yeah, I mean, I understand. I mean, Adam says he doesn't want to play at that level. Well, and you're right. It's like, so he's saying he plays, he plays almost exclusively the war between China and Japan during the 30s and 40s. Okay. Now, fucking brutal. Japanese were fucking monsters, and the Chinese people suffered for it. And, I get it. But it's the reality. I mean, if you're playing like Shanghai, you're playing Nanking, you're playing almost any of the large urban assaults, you're gonna have that civilian say those people don't just vanish. They're there. They're stuck there. And you have because we just played a game not too long ago where the Japanese were using some civilians as like cover, and the Chinese didn't shoot at them. They wouldn't shoot at them. So there was that factor. And then we had somewhere the Chinese like found some civilians and they escorted them off the board. So again, that unit of Chinese or parts of that unit of Chinese are gone because they're dealing with the civilians and they're escorting them off the table. So in essence, they're in game mechanics, they become casualties because they're not being able to be used in an offensive manner. So, you don't necessarily have to kill the civilians, or but your troops are dealing with them, and they lose their effectiveness. The squad loses its efficiency for it. But yeah, I mean, but you can also use civilians can always be that wild card too. You can always, if they're around, you can have that one that ends up having a Molotov or one that ends up having a cluster grenade. Right, and they could do that one damage against something heavy in the enemy's army. So again, it's up to you guys. And again, that's why you don't see, very rarely you see civilian rules in any rule book. I know JC wrote some civilian stuff for his for the nuts stuff for 2 Hour War Games, and because JC's fucking madman, he's great. He fucking thinks about everything. It's fantastic, but a lot of these games, they just don't have it. They just don't. They don't want to, deal with that, or it's too heavy, or it's too real, or whatever it might be, and that's fine. It's just. But again, I think civilians are a good way to cause variables in your game that you're not prepared for. They'll reduce the efficiency of your troops and the effectiveness of your weapons because of whatever it might be. So, it's something to think about. And then the civilian, if you're playing, and especially if you're playing campaigns, make notes of what's happening. The word gets around that they're being merciful to civilians, or if you're not, that could build up a swell of either good fortune or bad fortune for you as you progress in the campaign. What's up, Ashley? What's going down? What's up, Greg? Greg and Ashley from Gamers with Coffee are here. But yeah, so that is civilians. And then if you get into the weird war side, civilians you can actually just play civilians. Let's say you have a deep one incursion into your town, and the deep ones are, they need breeding stock or whatever the fuck it might be. The civilians rise up. There'll be they can be a spattering of different kind of levels of troop qualities and bring you whatever crude weapons, or even like if it's happening in shit, if the deep ones like attack Houston or Corpus Christi or some shit, Texans are going to have a lot of weapons. Gonna have a lot of weapons, right? So that population will have fucking arms to defend themselves. But if you're like if you got some, lazy fishing seaside village off the coast of fucking England, right? We're talking what, shotguns, maybe some rifles, and they're not going to have the weaponry that a civilian in the U.S. would, that the Brits would. And then they have to fight off fucking gillmen. I mean, come on. And then civilians can be, if you're playing like mystical shit, civilians all of a sudden, you have a civilian population that turns hostile due to some sort of magics or some shit, right? So what do? Do you engage these civilians? You liquidate them, you kill them, or do you try to find the source that's forcing them to act in this way? So, it makes games challenging because morally, what are you willing to do as the commander in your game? As the force that you're playing. If you're playing SS and you're in the fucking Warsaw Ghetto, you're not gonna give a fuck. You just kill everybody. But if you're an ally, if you're a Frenchman fighting to liberate France, in World War II, you're gonna care about the civilians that are around you and the population around you. And then all of a sudden, like 5 civilians, their eyes get big and they start to glow and they start coming at you like they want to kill you. And then you realize, oh shit, these people are like being influenced in some way. Do I just hose them, kill them all? Or do I try to subdue them? That's another thing. We have rules in our mechanics where you can engage people in close combat in the meaningfully to try to subdue them. Okay, the intent is to subdue. So, but what that does is it lessens your bonus modifiers because you're not fighting as hard or as deadly against them. So there's some negative, or however you play, there'll be some penalties because guys coming at you and you got your bayonet. He's like, oh shit, I'm gonna hit him with the butt of my rifle instead of sticking him with my fucking bayonet. So you'll have that slight modification because you don't want to kill him. You just want to subdue him. So that's a way to play it. And then, you try to hunt down whatever's fucking, and that's another game in itself. Maybe the whole town has been whammied and you got to find the thing that's whammying everything. And you got to sneak around, be sneaky, try not to. And if you do run into somebody, just pop them in the face instead of shooting them in the face. So there you go. But yeah. So what are your takes on civilians, folks? Jason, Matt, Ashley, Greg, what do you guys do? Do you guys play with civilians? There's a lot of cool. Now, in certain scales, you're not going to find any civilians. Like I've never seen 15 millimeter scale civilians in anything. I've never seen 20 millimeter scale civilians, to be honest with you. But you'll see 28 mil. You'll see civilians, and especially in the since this is Weird World War II, you'll see World War II civilians. And shit, use those models, man. There's some great looking models. Get them out there. Have a, like again, if you have a third party, have them come up with a little story. Like, you got your battlefield, and this one structure has five refugees in it, right? And then on this turn, they're going to run for it. They're going to run for one of the table edges. And it's at that point, they'll block line of sight because, if you're friendly to them, you're not going to shoot through them if the enemy's behind them, right? And the enemy might just use them as a screen, to do whatever they need to do. I mean, it happened. So I love games where you're challenged. I fucking hate this fucking structured points versus points and you fight each other, blah, blah, blah. This is what's in my army. This is what's in my army. Let's fight. Fuck, man, I don't want to know what's in your army, dude. I want to play like I'm a battlefield commander on the battlefield. Like, okay, I'm assuming the enemy's over here. I'm not sure what he has, but if I was him, I would, engage. That would be covered with machine guns or whatever. That's what I like to play. I like to play hard. I like playing hard games, a challenging game. I don't need equality in points and all that shit. I want a good, fun game that challenges me and makes me think on how to best, deploy, and use my men and weaponry on the battlefield. Yeah, I mean, you gotta. Matt was saying super interesting, just hard to game. It's true. I mean, it takes more than just they all have rifles, and that their leadership is this. You put a story in it. And a lot of people don't do that. A lot of war gamers don't do like role playing at all. I mean, when I say role play, I'm not necessarily saying you play role play like D&D or whatever, but there may be limitations on the battlefield that you put on yourself, like no flame weapons in this town because it's a friendly town, or no artillery strikes in this town because it's a friendly town. Yeah, Jason. Oh, have you? Okay, so that's cool. That's another, Vietnam. Because the VC were so, and that's a big mechanic that you can use for, like let's say in Vietnam VC stuff. They're civilians. They didn't wear their fucking black pajamas until Tet, and then they all got fucking wasted. Tet killed all the fucking VC because the NVC or the North Vietnamese just said, "Yeah, go get them," and they all fucking died, dude, to the man. But what happens is you've got that civilian population that could just pop up out of nowhere. That's why if you have infiltrators or partisans or resistance fighters, they should have some sort of rules where they just pop up. They don't come onto the battlefield. They're already there, and you don't see them in that they're already in structures or in the place, or they just meld in with the rest of the population, and you don't see them until they start shooting at you. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we really play anything that you guys play. I mean, I'd be down for playing whatever. Anything that you guys play. I mean, I'd be down for playing whatever. That'd be fun. We should try to coordinate them. Man, I am just floating in my words today. But yeah, so civilians could be a lot of fun. An interesting and very challenging aspect of any war game. Especially platoon or lower and skirmish games. When you get into company or battalion level, they're not going to make much of a factor because you're doing mostly maneuvering elements, not like individuals fighting. You're doing like whole maneuvering elements against it. So, but civilians can translate into any kind of fucking time frame. There's always refugees seeking shelter from a combat zone. Always. And there's a a horrific scene in the book is called Red Army, and it's about a weird. It's about a World War III, like 1980s World War III. The Soviets attacked Germany. And there's a scene where the Soviets are in this tree line and they're overlooking this expanse of like this valley. And there's a road. There's like a highway road running through it, and it's just stacked full of refugees. Like thousands, hundreds of thousands of refugees are just leaving this area, and they're all on this road, right? And it's at that exact moment that the Soviet commander looks over the horizon and starts to see a company of Abrams like pulling up to the ridge line and stopping because they see this human wall. And then all of a sudden, guess what? There's a fucking there's fire between both units. So they're crossing these helpless fucking civilians. And what do? You fucking, and then they do what they do. That's what invaders do. They just fucking charge through them. They got in within the civilians, and the Americans balked for a second because they didn't want to shoot the civilians, and allowed the Soviets to advance to a position where they were able to fucking get to the Americans easier. But fuck, that's brutal. But again, it's in a tactical sense that Soviet commander was able to use that fucking that that morality to his advantage and use them as a shield or a screen, and it worked. The Americans bulked, and the Soviets were able to outflank them and do what they did. But yeah, it was a hard scene to read, but it's rough. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's another thing. If you have a third party player, you can just say there's a civilian, and if you find them, like in the game, and you don't tell people this shit. You're playing a normal game. Let's say you're playing a normal game of Chain of Command, right? And then all of a sudden, your British unit goes into this structure, and then all of a sudden your game master goes, "Hey, dude," he puts a little civilian down there, and you're like, "What the fuck?" And he's like, "Yeah, so this guy has intel on enemy locations, and maybe it gives you some sort of bonus, or maybe you're able to deploy like your deployment marker further in a different direction, or whatever the fuck." So you just gotta think, man. So guys, you have these game mechanics, right? If let's say if you love bolt action, that's great, dude. If it's a game that you resonate with and you like and you love to play it and you're all into it, then do it. But if you want more from it, fucking do more with it. Just add your own shit to it, man. And if people don't want to do that, then fucking don't play with them. Find the people who think like you, who want to play like you. Find those guys and gals and play like that, man. Right on, Ashley. I mean, and that one civilian that you secure or bring to safety could have some sort of information, but then on the flip side, it could be dishing out false information too. So and especially in campaigns, man, you can like that information you can use. You can choose. Let's say it's cloudy. You don't have air cover. You don't have any air reconnaissance. Do you take, and you don't have any, all your reconnaissance units have been blasted or whatever, you don't know where the fucking enemy is at, do you use the information from these civilians, or you don't? Maybe that information is beneficial and you get a boon in your campaign for it, or it's a ruse, and you get shafted. But that's what, when you play long enough, guys, and again, I'm not trying to be uppity and snooty and shit, but when you war game long enough, okay, you don't want the same old shit. You don't want Army A fights Army B and that's it. Bleh. It's boring. It gets boring. It's repetitive. It's boring. So that's when you start coming up with all this shit, these scenarios. It always starts with scenarios. Like, oh yeah, let's do this. There's if you capture this truck, you're able to use the radio and call in artillery fire. It's that little shit. And then from there, you're like, you know what? I want to add this whatever into our game. And then next thing you know, you've rewritten bolt action into the way you want to play. These fucking companies don't own your gaming, man. So don't let them. Play how you want. Use their stuff. If you like their mechanics, use them. But if you want to change them, do it, man. And then show it off. Make battle reports, and you don't have to do videos. Take pictures and talk about them. Put them on your blogs, put them on your news groups, your Discords, and your Facebooks, and let people see that there's other ways to play these games, because that's when you start having a lot of fun, when you make it yours and you come to these games in a whole new way. They're brand new games, and you become challenged and you become frustrated because all of a sudden there's all this weird shit. But you know what? You got to deal with it instead of, oh, that's not the official rule. Fuck it. War ain't fucking equal, and war ain't black and white. It throws variables in you, and you run into shit that you didn't expect. Play those kind of games. If you're playing skirmish games, man, you could go crazy on stories and ideas. Make it your own. Have fun. You know, and again, I'm telling you, you guys will get burned out playing the same engagements. Zap. Oh, this widget 6 inches away from this. Just there's no meaning, dude. There's no heart to it. There's no soul to it. It's just some arbitrary widget in the middle of a fucking road. You know why? So let's come up with a story. Let's at least stick to pieces of terrain. There's a blown up Jeep. You got to secure what was in the Jeep, or there's an anti-aircraft unit. You got to secure that because you got gliders coming. Your pathfinders. You got to secure that unit, destroy it, or render it ineffective, so your gliders can come in, or your helicopters can come in, whatever the fuck it might be. So it's I've found out that games that have a purpose are a lot more fun. But anyways, woo! Man, that was a lot of talking. Damn, I've already been talking for an hour. Woo! Crazy. Well, yeah, so there's all sorts of civilian manufacturers, at least for World War II, at least. You can get pulp figures. They do mostly pulp stuff, but a lot of their stuff, would work. What is it? Eureka Miniatures has lots of different civilians in different in different eras. Unarmed civilians, you can find like partisans and resistance fighters and militia and shit like that, and a lot of the larger, minis manufacturers. So that's not a big deal. But if you're looking for like unarmed civilians, look towards the pulp. Look towards the the Call of Cthulhu kind of stuff. Look towards the gangster, mini lines. I know that Empress Miniatures, they do that very British Civil War. They've got a lot of like civilian factions that would work well for like resistance, militias, or even unarmed fascist units. That's fucking great. Eureka or Empress is great. And again, there's a lot of and then shit, dude. I'm not as familiar with the STL world, but I know those STL houses, dude. There's people making all sorts of like generic, stuff. So if you guys find some kick-ass lines for civilians in the weird World War II or World War II era, I usually say from 1930 to 1950. That's kind of the era that I look for. Let us know. Put it in the description or come to our various locales on the description below, and be part of the conversation. Tell us what your gaming is like. We do a lot of civilians, especially in urban settings. Rural settings not so much. You might run into a couple people, but urban, they're usually every house has civilians in it, and you got to deal with it. Do you just ignore them, kill them, or you secure them? So or help them escape. So leaves a new level of fucking gaming. Woo! What will you do? Will you be the bastard who ties a civilian to the front of your tank in hopes that the enemy won't shoot, or will you be the one that runs up to that tank and cuts him loose, grabs him, or grabs her, takes her off into the night to save her? Or do you just ignore it and run the other way? I don't know. It's and it allows you to, like, as you play, you can play a total fucking bastard. You can play the hero, or you can just be neutral and just, hey, it was in the way, whatever. Okay, so Jay, for the scale that we play, it'd be O scale in the railroad world. O scale. Yeah, so they do. A lot of railroad stuff, unfortunately, is kind of like 70s, 60s, and little modern, but or Western. I see a lot of Western and like kind of like, you know, close, you know, not quite modern era right now, but like, you know, 60s, 70s, whatever, 80s. But yeah, so O scale is also a great place to find cities if you can. It depends on what scale or what era you play. So if you play in that era, you might find all sorts of cool shit. Oh yeah, you should play Pulp Alley. Yeah, that's a lot of fun, man. You should play that, Ashley. That's a great game. All right, guys. Well, it's an hour in. Woo! That went quick. Talking about civvies. I guess I'm gonna call it. My throat's hurting. I've been talking, yammering and rammering. All right, guys. So whatever you do, go check out Gamers with Coffee. Awesome general gaming site. Go see Road Agent Leather. Some badass fucking. Jason's a leather master. He makes all sorts of kick-ass shit, dude. It's pretty amazing what he can make. Oh, dude, I need to talk to you because I want to commission you on doing something. Mel wants a holster for her 38, so I have to coordinate with you and see what we can do with that. Matt, it's always a pleasure, brother. You know, we need a game again sometime, dude. It'd be good. And Adam and his crazy channel of China, the conflicts in China, wargaming China. That's fucking fantastic. Now, Adam is a goddamn rivet counter, man. This guy knows his shit. So if you want some deep, in-depth reality checkage, go check out Adam's wargaming China. He knows his shit. All the obscure stuff. All right, guys. Well, I'm gonna call it. But whatever you do, they coming by. First of all, whatever you do, keep it weird. See you.